What's going on, everybody? Today we're talking all things about the 2025 New York Jets, specifically if Justin Fields will maybe turn into this year's key late-round quarterback we should be drafting in Fantasyland, if we should be pounding the table for Garrett Wilson and all that target upside in round 3, and whether or not Breece Hall still has top 5 upside at the position. All that and much more today on the Fantasy Life Show, and accordingly, let's get right into it. Joining me, as always, we have Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. And Dwain, going to start things off with the Ohio State University's own Justin Fields. Let's face it, hasn't exactly had the best professional start to his career. Time in Chicago obviously didn't go great. Then goes to Pittsburgh, starts the first 6 games. Russell Wilson gets healthy, takes his job afterwards. So again, verdict very much out. I should say, maybe the verdict isn't out, all right? The man's not a very good professional passer. I will admit that. If you look at this wide receiver room outside of Garrett Wilson in New York, yeah, I'm not exactly expecting new career high marks and passing efficiency from Fields. All that to say, if there's one thing this man can do, it's score fantasy points. And it looks like, based on the lack of actual young competition on this roster at quarterback, with all due respect to Tyrod Taylor, Fields should have a pretty long leash. And when that's been the case, man, he puts up great QB1 fantasy numbers. So what are we missing here?
Yeah, I think without an injury, Fields is going to be starting all of these games. And so that's a big plus for him right away. When we think about like the late round quarterbacks to target this year, I think he's definitely on the menu. When you look at his range of outcomes, so using our ceiling and floor variance logic, Ian, his floor is 15.6 fantasy points per game. And a lot of that's tied to what you talked about as a passer in games over his career where he's had 90% or more of the snaps. So just get rid of injured games or games where you rotated in to take over for somebody. Got rid of all that. 180 passing yards per game. The NFL average over the last 3 years is down. It's at 215, but it's not at 180. So, I mean, with Fields, I've got his median projection at 190. I'm giving him a little bit of love there, not a ton. But it's the 55 yards rushing per game in those same games, man, and of 90% plus snaps. I mean, 55 rushing yards per game. We're talking about Lamar Jackson territory. We're talking about going back to Robert Griffin III. We're talking about, some of these seasons that we've seen from some of the very best dual threat quarterbacks in the NFL. So he checks the box as a rusher. The passing is the concern. But having said all that, man, his median projection is still really strong, comes in at a 19, and the ceiling is 23.7. It's the 8th highest. So he can't get to that 28, 27 range that we see for Lamar and Josh and Jaden because he doesn't have the high upside as the passer. But man, what if he spikes for 225 passing yards per game? Like that wouldn't be like the most unreasonable thing ever. And what if he threw 1.5 touchdowns per game instead of throwing like 0.9? Like those are like realistic little things that could happen in the passing game. And if he keeps up what he's doing as a runner, like it really could unlock a ceiling that people are very happy about in fantasy football in 2025. I think the other thing that could happen for him that could easily swing things in his favor as far as when we think about this ceiling outcome is he's really been more along the archetype of Lamar and even what we saw from Jaden Daniels as far as what he gets to do from a rushing touchdown standpoint, not getting as many of those carries inside the 5-yard line. But, man, he's a little bit bigger than those guys. He's not Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts size, but he's kind of a tweener between those guys, a little more size. So I could see him picking up a little bit more. And I think that's another path where if we just suddenly got a spike in the rushing touchdowns, which is certainly within the range of outcomes for him, like we could feel really, really good about Justin Fields. So I have been saying multiple times I'm very into taking the elite dual threat quarterback early because I'm not as high on Justin Fields as I have been Jaden Daniels in 2024. In 2021, it was Jalen Hurts. 2023 was Anthony Richardson. Hand up, we were wrong. We didn't know like he was a rookie, but we were giving him the benefit of the doubt. He basically turned into worse than Justin Fields, like as a passer. But I don't have a name that I can really hang my hat on that I think could also really like flourish as a passer. So the next best thing is Fields. And Fields, because of how consistent that we've seen these guys that get these yards on the ground, man, and they do it year over year until they start to age out of it, like you can count on it. And so I think that's a part of Justin Fields' game. It's just going to make it really hard for him to fell in and not end up being inside the top 10. The ceiling, like getting to 23.7 fantasy points per game, things have to really, really go right for him. But I think what you can feel really comfortable about is like a 19 to 20 fantasy points per game median, which is not bad when you're getting him at like QB 10.
Last 3 years, Fields finished as QB5, QB11, most recently QB8. And as Dwain just mentioned, he is only costing you a QB10 price tag at the moment. So they just want to reiterate again how much of a lock these high volume rushing quarterbacks have been in recent history. We've actually had 31 different quarterbacks have at least 100 carries in a season since 2014. Out of those 31, only 10% finished outside of fantasy's top 12 quarterbacks. They were 2014 Colin Kaepernick, 2018 Lamar Jackson, which is honestly skewed just because he had so many games where he wasn't starting. He kind of came in for a couple snaps as a wildcat in place of Flacco. And then 2020 Cam Newton, who threw like 9 touchdowns and still finished as a QB17 because of what he was doing on the ground. So it's one of these things, Dwain, where, yeah, you're right. He certainly does check the rushing box, but I feel like we almost discount how great of a threat that rushing can be. It's at a different level than guys even like Kyler Murray and then Drake May. We're talking about Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, and Justin Fields, only quarterbacks in NFL history averaging at least 50 rushing yards per game. That's pretty special. So He's my 4th most drafted quarterback of the offseason. Maybe I didn't learn my lesson on Anthony Richardson as much as you. I've been not drafting him as often since we've gotten the AC joint, just update. But again, if we aren't going to be investing this top 3, top 4 round pick into Josh Allens of the world, which, hey, we just talked about in our Bills team preview, we are happy to pay that price tag in the 3rd round this year. But if not, it does seem like Justin Fields going far later, arguably next best thing.
Yeah, and I do like Justin Fields slightly more in like home leagues, ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper, those formats than I do like best ball. And the reason why is in best ball, like you can play Justin Fields naked. You don't have to draft a teammate with him. In fact, like it's a very viable plan that you can go with. But it is a little bit tougher to get excited about stacking, right? Because it's just there's going to be some limitations to the passing game. I know we're about to talk about Garrett Wilson, some of the other players here. What does this mean for them? But with Fields, I think to your point, he's a player that I'm very willing to draft. I still like Kyler over him. I'm going Bo Nix over him. But once I get past those 2 names, it's Justin Fields, who actually shows more ceiling, right, than some of the other guys I love, like Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy, some of these other guys. So his ceiling is it's no thing to laugh at. It's just when you're playing on best ball, some of those other guys give me slightly more stack options. And so I do tend to lean into them a little bit more on Underdog and as well as on DraftKings.
Certainly is someone I'm looking to target all the time when I do go ahead and get Garrett Wilson in round 3. So let's talk about the Jets' young wide receiver right after a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Check out the new whip.
Tight.
Fully custom.
How many Bud Lights can you fit in that puppy?
As many Bud Lights as it takes.
That's a lot of Bud Lights. You have to give me one of those.
All right, Dwain, not sure if you know this, but in fantasy football, you need to be throwing the ball as a receiver in order to actually register fantasy points. And looking at your target projections over at fantasylife.com, sure doesn't seem like there are too many wide receivers who are going to have more opportunities to do that than Garrett Wilson this year. Right now, sitting there with the 11th highest target total, the only guys going ahead of him, Malik Neighbors, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Puka, Jettas, London, BTJ, Nico, our one true sun god, and Devontae Adams. So all of those guys, we are pretty much happy to draft as top 15 wide receivers. Of course, the elephant in the room is Justin Fields and all that lack of passing upside that we just got done discussing. So with Garrett, 3 straight seasons with over 1,000 yards to start his career. Yes, I checked. He would have accomplished that even without the benefit of a 17th game. So don't give me that slander. Again, in very good company. Adams is now in Los Angeles. There's 0 target competition on this roster. Why shouldn't we be investing in the young, potentially electric? We've seen him flash that ability on the football field. Undisputed number 1 target in New York. Why not, Dwain? Because I've certainly been drafting him a lot.
Yeah, I am interested to see how much you've been drafting him because you and I both, I think, have him as wide receiver 20 or 19, and he's going wide receiver 13 on Underdog. So he's going well ahead of where we've got him ranked right now. Do what?
I have him that low.
Yeah, you can check yours. I think you were. I looked before the show. I'm pretty sure you're wide receiver 20. So now you're going to have to move him up.
I'm 15.
Okay, wide receiver 15.
Feel good.
All right. So looking at the history of passers, right, that threw for 175 to 200 yards per game, which is squarely the bucket that we've seen Justin Fields in. Now, you talked yesterday about how the quality of the offense, especially from a touchdown standpoint, doesn't always have to matter as much for wide receivers and tight ends, especially if you're playing in a PPR, half PPR, because you get the freebies. If you just get the catches, those are going to be points. But Going back to 2011, Ian, here are the number of wide receiver 1 finishes that we've gotten. There are 101 wide receivers in the sample that ran at least 400 routes, that had a team that threw between 175 and 200 passing yards per game. 2% of them went on to be wide receiver 1s. So pretty narrow path to a big ceiling, in my opinion, this year for Garrett Wilson. As much as I love him, like when I hear the word Garrett Wilson or the name Garrett Wilson, my brain immediately flashes talent, talent, talent. I have no doubts about Garrett Wilson's talent profile. Good target earner. Hasn't quite been there yards per route run, but it's hard to hold it against him because he's had some really terrible quarterback play with Zach Wilson. Then last year had to battle Devontae Adams for targets. But if you look at the number of guys that got to a wide receiver 2 finish, right? So that's wide receiver 13 to 24 in a PPR league. Again, out of that 101 wide receiver sample, 14%. Then we look at the guys that got to a wide receiver 3 finish, 19% of them. So essentially, you add those things up, we're looking at what, 35, 36, 37% chance of being at least a wide receiver 3. Now, having said all that, this doesn't normalize for talent profiles. So if I were to go back and say, hey, condense this down to guys that have had a target share in the same range as Garrett Wilson, the hit rates are going to improve here. So I'm not trying to completely dismiss it. But it is a challenge, man. And so I have not drafted a lot of Garrett Wilson, which is the first time in the history of my life to not draft a lot of Garrett Wilson. I've been in on Garrett Wilson every single year. For me, the challenge this year, Ian, is just where he's going. There are several other players that I also really do like. And you talked about it earlier, opportunity cost is really everything when we talk about this with fantasy football. And so maybe there's some names here that you feel a little bit differently about versus Garrett Wilson. But when I get to this range of the draft, right, where he's going right now in fantasy, I'm taking Rashee Rice every time. Right. I'm taking Rashee Rice every time. Ladd doesn't really make it there. He goes a couple of picks ahead, but I would take Ladd McConkey every time. Then we get into this range here where we've got T. Higgins. So T. Higgins, I think we know, is more of a wide receiver 2 that can give you a spike wide receiver 1 upside. T. Higgins, if he didn't have Jamar Chase, guys, I think would be a wide receiver 1. So now you're talking about a wide receiver 2 on a very pass heavy offense with an elite quarterback versus probably a better talent, honestly. Garrett Wilson is probably a better wide receiver than T. Higgins, but he's playing on an offense that honestly might, when we add up all their pass attempts, they could throw for 3 less games worth of pass attempts. So then you have to be okay, he's getting the target share, but T. Higgins, pass attempts wise, might be worth 3 more games with what the Bengals are going to do. So it just gets tricky for me. So Ben, honestly, I've been leaning a little to T. Higgins there. I will say this is a muddled part of the draft which is Rashee Rice, I think, is the easy click. And then to your point, you could nitpick all these other guys that are in the range of Garrett Wilson. Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously we know there's concerns there, but he's going into year 2. I have been taking him over Garrett Wilson just because I feel slightly better about Kyler. And we talked about Tyreek Hill. I have been taking over Garrett Wilson. So I'm not saying that I'm completely right on all those picks, man. I just worry that there could be so much running. I think that when you look at Aaron Glenn coming over, one, defensive-minded coach, comes from playing defense. By the way, guys, Aaron Glenn, if you don't know, was a badass cornerback back in the day. Yeah. Dude was an absolute dog, right? So comes over from Detroit. What are they going to want to do? They're going to want to try to keep games close. They're going to want to try to win with their defense, which they still have a lot of pieces on. You expect him to scheme up some nice things on the defensive side of the ball. So I just feel like when you put it all together and then the potential for a low catchable ball rate from Justin Fields, it's not just the attempts going down because Fields is taking off scrambling and we're going to have this more conservative approach. I just feel like, man, there's so many different ways for it to go wrong. Having said all of that, when Garrett Wilson falls past ADP, that's when I draft him. It's back to because I really do like the talent profile still. Man, I just have him at wide receiver 14 because I do have him ranked wide receiver 20. I don't have very much exposure.
I've got 14%. And for those unfamiliar with, just what these percentages, that's a decent amount, but again, not exactly the sort of high amount that I'd be going out of my way every time because not only the wide receivers where, again, even if I I'll take Garrett over Marvin Harrison Jr. We're not lockstep on all those takes you listed off there, but I do think, the Devontae Adams of the world, the Tyreek Hills, and obviously the Rashee Rices and T. Higgins, when that is close, which it currently is in some of these drafts, I don't have the biggest stand in the world on Garrett Wilson there. And also, Dwain, it's the running backs of that group group that really, have me fading Garrett in a lot of these drafts. I mean, when Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown and Kyron Williams and some of these guys are going where Garrett is, it brings me flashbacks of last year when we were taking guys like Chris Olave and Jalen Waddle in round 2 over backs who we knew had RB1 upside. So that is the concern here where, again, I believe in the talent with Garrett, but he's had that talent each of these last 3 years, and he's only managed to finish wide receiver 30, wide receiver 32, most recently wide receiver 20. So again, a situation where is the 2%, you said it, 2% had a top 12 season. Is that DJ Moore with Justin Fields? Is that all we can hang our hat on?
He's one
here?
of them. He's one of them. Yeah, he's one of them that made it. So, I mean, if you want to hang your hat on that, go for it.
It feels like the thing that everyone does with the rookie wide receiver who just has a horrible year and they go, well, it wasn't great. But let me tell you a story about Devontae Adams, all right? That's all I can really do, and I just got to hang my hat on that one exception. I don't think that's the wisest bet to make. So I know I got Garrett on like 2 of my 3 dynasty teams. I'm not selling him. I still believe in the guy, but yeah, not so sure we're going to see that explosion this year. Another guy, though, Dwain, in the same offense conveniently, Mr. Breece Hall, someone who goes in this round 3 range of drafts. And honestly, Breece Hall versus Garrett straight up, I do think we should be giving Hall the benefit of the doubt. That said, depending on what you've been hearing, throughout this offseason, we've had Aaron Glenn talking about the belief that the Jets have 3 good running backs, referencing Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis as well. So with Breece in 2023, we saw him ride a lot of volume to an RB6 finish in PPR points per game. Wasn't nearly as cool last year, finished just the RB17. So on the one hand, with dual threat quarterbacks, generally not a good thing for the fantasy upside of their team's running backs, because even if we do see the yards per carry spike with that gravity in the read option game, they usually scramble instead of checking down, and they factor into that equation near the goal line. That said, as you mentioned before with Fields, we don't exactly have the Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, a complete touchdown vulture, from the one. And also, if you do look at some of Fields' numbers from Chicago and even the Pittsburgh days, he has checked the ball down a lot more often than your typical high-volume dual-threat quarterback. So Breece Hall, for me, Dwain, someone who I wasn't necessarily going on my way for, some of the earlier drafts I was doing, but lately, I looked at him in round 3, and it's just like, what has really changed from last year when he was going as a top 3 running back? Breece Hall, man, might be the guy when we look back here in a couple months and say, why weren't we clicking him every single time?
Yeah, I think the devil's advocate on, Breece Hall is, what if the offense really is just complete trash and they can't move the ball and score touchdowns? You've talked about on the previous shows that wide receivers, while they can overcome that, tight ends can overcome that with the receptions. For the running backs and for the quarterbacks, right, there really is this stronger correlation with the quality of your offense and the fantasy output. So I would say that's the one concern. Having said all of that, I'm very similar to you. I was not drafting a ton of Breece Hall early over the last 3 to 4 weeks. I have definitely started to sprinkle him in a little bit more. And it's just after starting to dig into more of these players, and just go to that second and third level of analysis. But Breece, only 24 years old, clearly in his prime, PPR points per game, 16.7, 17.0, 15.1, right? So, it's going to be 15.1 could just be a blip, right? And he's really more of this 17 to 16.7 per game guy. That gives you running back 1 upside. If you look at him in 2024, he was still good, Ian, even though the other backup running backs were not. 4.2 yards per carry, 3 yards after contact, slightly above the NFL average. 17% missed tackles forced per attempt. That's right in line with the NFL average, but 12% explosive rush rate. So getting some of that juice back now, 2 years removed from that knee injury, what we saw last year. The average for an NFL back is 9.5%. So he was above that. The other thing, man, for as much love as Braylon Allen gets, and people like to talk about him, he wasn't very good. 3.6 yards per carry, 2.9 yards after contact. That's right at the NFL average. 11% missed tackles forced per attempt. This feels like A.J. Dillon more than anything. The average NFL back's at 17%. That's kind of gross. His explosive rush rate, which is carries of 10 plus yards, 5%. That's gross. Rushing yards over expected, not necessarily a sticky stat year over year, but, it worked against him, so why not throw it in the analysis? He was a minus 0.64 on that front. And if you guys don't know how rushing yards over expected works, if you go use next gen stats, it's just accounting for all the things, the yard line, the stack box, all that kind of stuff. So it's a way to kind of try to equalize. Again, not always a sticky stat year over year, but by every account, man, Braylon Allen was not a good running back. And what's funny is that kind of feels opposite of the narrative that you hear. And the other thing, that you hear is obviously, you got Aaron Glenn coming in, but also we've got coming over Tanner Engstrand's taking over as offensive coordinator. So he was on the offensive staff with the Lions. So the other potential narrative here is, oh, well, the Lions like to really split things up between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Well, guess what? Jahmyr Gibbs is elite and David Montgomery's good. I don't think we can even call Braylon Allen good. So when I hear Aaron Glenn talk about mixing up the running backs and all that stuff, honestly, I'm just not going to read too much into it. I think this is Breece's backfield. I think one of these other guys would have to do something better than what we saw last year to truly earn more carries. I think Braylon carries some contingent upside. Isaiah Davis even could be in the mix for contingent upside if something happens to Breece. But I'm with you. I've been drafting him a little bit more. The one caveat is, man, we just need this offense to be good enough to give us a chance to score like 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns. That's my biggest concern with Breece. But man, this is a guy that can work in the pass game, checks all the other boxes that we want. And again, in his prime right now.
Is a situation too where I mentioned the impact of these dual threat quarterbacks, where this actually is maybe needed with the Jets more so than any other team out there. I mean, in terms of their RB, yards before contact per carry ranks, during Breece's career, they've been 30th, 23rd, and 26th. You add Fields, you add an offensive line that actually wasn't bad last year and now has back-to-back top 11 picks, at their left and right tackle spots. And again, if you were, because we talked about this with, kind of like the Bills, Dwain, like how maybe they could be more pass happy because you look at, again, James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson. Is that really the running back room that you want to just, again, lean fully into the run? Maybe they will. But this Jets team, defensive-minded head coach, dual threat quarterback in Justin Fields, it would make sense for them if their defense can hold up, which they have been pretty darn good in recent years, to try to be this rock 'em, sock 'em, slug it out team where you are leaning on the ground game, which would be Breece Hall. So again, a situation where I said round 3, but he even slides into round 4 in some of these drafts. And just again, when it's Breece Hall versus guys like DJ Moore, Xavier Worthy, Jameson Williams of the world, not saying I'm out on those wide receivers necessarily, but man, again, this is a running back where we could be sitting here in week 2 going, 80% snaps, 20 combined carries and targets. Yeah, it's Breece Hall. Duh.
He can be a top 3 running back. And we're talking about, like, we're living in a world right now where we're loaded at running back. Range of outcomes realistically for Breece Hall is he could be a top 3 running back in 2025. And to your point, where you're getting him drafts right now, it is an absolute steal. I won't be surprised if we actually see that ADP start to climb. And I think people start to come around on Breece. The offense could hold it down just enough to where it's fine. We keep getting him where he's at. I guess my question to you, Ian, where would you draw the line? Like, if Breece got to an ADP of X, would it be enough where you're like, man, I really like him, but this offense is enough now that, like, I'm probably going to slow my roll, not taking as often?
Let's see. Right now he's going already RB13, right behind Kyren, Chase Brown. I think Josh Jacobs at RB10, it's like, what are we doing? Like, well, I just feel so good about that Packers offense. I'm fully expecting Jacobs to get that work. I would say, got Kyren's right there too. I'd be fine moving Breece Hall ahead of Chase Brown because I think there's similar potential problems with the workload, but he deserves to be in that group, man. That's a good question. How about you?
Yeah, I think he's in that. I think he's in that tier. I think there's an easy world where he outperforms all the guys we just talked about, or they could outperform him. I think if you just go pure talent, like as far as dual threat talent, like potential explosive playmaking as well as the ability out of the backfield, I think Breece actually grades ahead of all those guys. But to your point, some of those guys play on offenses we love, like the Rams, and then we talk about the Packers. So again, this is the interesting part around fantasy. Like, it's not you got to dice up all these different parts and then put them back together. So I'm with you. I love the range Breece is going in right now. I think where it would get tricky for me is if he started to creep up towards that 2-3 turn. Right? Once he gets into that range, I still think you could make a case for him, because if you think about the receivers that are going there, I think you could make a case for Breece Hall. The problem starts to become some of the other running backs, to your point, that are going there. How much further you want to go? I would say the absolute ceiling that I would never go past is once you get to the middle of round 2 where Achane is going. I'm going to prefer Achane every time. But past that, and I think this is the positive for Breece Hall, I think you could make an argument for him going anywhere between the end of round 3, early round 4, all the way up to the early part of round 2. Or sorry, the late part of round 2.
I was going to say, give me Achane for sure, and I have a hard time believing I'll ever rank Breece Hall ahead of Jonathan Taylor ahead of this year. But if we see him run hot,
I agree with that.
If we get the first team preseason usage and Breece Hall is looking like an 80% back, meanwhile, Bucky is, all of a sudden, oh man, Rachaad White's still hanging around here. We see Marshawn Lloyd get healthy for once and turn that into a bit more of, Matt LaFleur's past committee backfields. Maybe the Rams finally decide to use one of these rookie running backs a little bit more. There are potential, and not saying this couldn't happen to Breece Hall as well, but again, he has a run out to where, we could be treating him as a top 8, top 9 RB, and right now being treated outside the top 12, someone I am lining up to draft there at the end of round 3 into round 4. So feeling good about Breece. We'll say, guys, probably the last overly fantasy relevant player we're going to be talking about here, with all due respect to Jason Taylor's son, Mason Taylor, new tight M1 for the New York Jets. But that said, Dwain, again, we have plenty of fantasy leagues out there, redraft, best ball, and some fun ones. But in Dynasty land, I know you're in these streets as well. And for tight end premium drafts, man, between Mason Taylor, Elijah Arroyo, and even Terrence Ferguson over there with the Rams, I've been very pleasantly surprised to see I can get these guys in the later parts of round 2, even in the round 3 in tight end premium leagues. So talk about, even if it's not going to be the biggest role this year, what you might think of Mason Taylor down the line in Dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, so these tight ends are really tricky. Obviously, I've got Colson Loveland at the top. You look at the rookie supermodel, like he's in very rare air. Then we've got Tyler Warren. All makes sense, even if you guys just said, oh, well, first round NFL draft capital, that's really easy. But then you get to the fact that we've got Harold Fannin, who just really has a great profile. He's kind of blocked right now a little bit with David Njoku, unless they get creative with how they want to use him, let him play some slot, things like that. So I'm still going to have Fannin above, because I do think the long-term ceiling for him is higher than what we have with Mason Taylor. I think the question comes down to him versus Ferguson and where you really land on that one. But if you look at a prospect like Mason Taylor, Ian, so going back to 2018 is when the supermodel started. We've had 43 tight ends register a supermodel rating in the range that he came out after we put his NFL draft capital in. 7% of them went on to have a top 6 finish in their first 3 years. 14% became top 9 players. 21% became top 12 tight ends. So it's a pretty narrow range here of him becoming a guy that's going to be a hit. Having said all of that, when you look at the depth chart and you look at what's going on right now with the Jets, I mean, the path's certainly open, and we should know pretty quickly. And I do think there's value in that. If you can see a situation where it's kind of a tiebreaker between him and Terrence Ferguson, I probably would lean to Mason Taylor, just because I feel like we can find out this year if Mason Taylor's good or not. It might be a year before we know on Terrence Ferguson. So like the Rams offense more, but at the same time, Stafford's getting old. Is he even going to be there another year? We might not like the Rams offense as much in another year from now. So I do lean Mason Taylor as my option after Harold Fannin, but I would say in a tier with Terrence Ferguson.
We'll say as much as we want to try to sometimes hang our hat on the Garrett Wilson breakout being in line with what DJ Moore did in 2023. Cole Kmet had himself a nice season then too, man. 73 catches, 719 yards, 6 touchdowns. Again, the bulk of that coming with Justin Fields under center. So if you just look in that late round tight end landscape and you try to say, okay, who realistically could run hot, get that full-time role because the organization believes in them, and actually F's around and finishes as the number 2 pass game option on their team. I mean, again, Josh Reynolds, Allen Lazard, these are the wide receivers that are going to be target competition here for Mason Taylor in the year 2025. I do think weirder things could happen. So in your redraft leagues, unless you're talking tight end premium, again, I don't think he's someone you need to worry about drafting at all. But again, be ready for the waiver wire articles coming out there in week 2, maybe even in the preseason, because if we do see that full-time role unfold, you can do worse in fantasy land than a young, talented player at the position getting a chance to play every down. So Dwain, that is going to go ahead and take us to our win total prediction. Sitting down at a lowly 5.5. They joined the Saints, Browns, Titans, and Giants as the only teams this low. And sadly, I will be going with the under. So again, we got the elite Bills. I think the Patriots are rising. Even the Dolphins are more competitive than this squad. Ultimately, I just think that there's enough question marks on offense, a defense that regressed a bit last year. This looks like a bad football team. I do think they finished with exactly 5 wins. Bull call would be Justin Fields rushing enough, though, to go ahead and give us another QB1 finish. I'll even say top 6. What say you?
I'm going to go with the over. I mean, they've had 5, 7, and 7 wins over the last 3 years. I know the defense regressed a little bit last year, but I still like a lot of what that defensive squad looks like. I like Aaron Glenn coming in, and taking over and helping, potentially get this defense performing back like to its potential. And then I just think with Glenn, what we're going to see is a game plan that's really centered around like, hey, we're just going to try to win these tight games. We're going to play defense. We're going to try to be efficient on offense. We're going to try not to like shoot ourselves in the foot, turn the ball over. And there's just a lot of opportunity. Now, it doesn't mean those aren't the kind of, teams that end up being able to go on a run to win a Super Bowl, but they are the kind of teams we've seen it over the years, man, with Mike Vrabel, who else going at Ron Rivera would sometimes field these sort of teams. And these guys, like, they just get it drilled in enough in their teams that they're not making the big mistakes. And it's easy to end up winning 7 or 8 games, right? You're not going to be, making a bid for the Super Bowl, but good enough to beat this line. So 5.5, I'm going to go with the over on the Jets. So I don't know if we're keeping track of these, Ian, but we've been on the opposite side of several of them.
We'll get it going. But it is a good point about, again, some of the one-score stuff. Jets were just 3-7 in games decided by 8 points or less last year. We do usually see that, not 100% flip-flop, but certainly could be due for some regression. So anyway, guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show. We'll be back, though, with some Patriots goodness, unless you're, a Jets fan who hates the Patriots, soon enough, though. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.